He kicked her to the curb with just the clothes she was wearing, certain she was the dead weight holding him back. Brian Thorne had it all: a billion-dollar fortune, a corporate empire, and a fiery young mistress on his arm. He believed his past was completely behind him. But tonight, in a room filled with the sound of clinking champagne glasses at the city's most exclusive restaurant, the past didn't just reappear, it made a grand entrance. When Brian looked up, he saw his pregnant ex-wife, radiant and untouchable, holding the hand of the one man in the business world he truly feared. In that moment, his heart did more than just stop. It completely fell apart. This is not just a tale of a broken heart. It is a story about the kind of quiet revenge that can shatter a person's world without making a sound. This story will teach you one brutal truth. The people you step on while climbing to the top are the same people who will watch you fall. And sometimes the most devastating revenge is not destruction. It is simply becoming so happy, so successful, that your betrayer realizes they were the one who lost everything. Stay until the end, because what happens to Brian 3 years later will change how you treat every single person in your life. The chandeliers at Lorney were not just made of crystal. The rumor Brian Thorne loved to circulate was that they were pure diamond. It suited the image he had built for himself. He was the man who could spin straw into gold, the tech genius who climbed from the tough streets of Chicago to the lavish penthouses of Manhattan. Tonight, Brian was seated at the finest table in the restaurant, the one typically held for visiting royalty or heads of state. Seated across from him was Chloe, a 23-year-old model whose beauty was as striking as her conversation was dull. She was busy scrolling through her Instagram feed, her perfectly polished thumb pausing on pictures of herself. "Put your phone away, Chloe," Brian said, his voice soft but with a sharp edge. "We are celebrating. The merger with Concade Logistics is final. I am now the official majority shareholder." Chloe glanced up, her blue eyes wide but empty. "Oh, that is right. Yay for you, baby. Does this mean we can finally buy that villa in Co? The one that comes with the boat dock?" Brian swirled the vintage Pinot Noir in his glass, feeling that familiar, heavy ache in his soul. It was the ache of profound boredom. "We can buy the entire lake if you want," he mumbled, but the words no longer gave him any thrill. It had been 6 months. That is how much time had passed since his divorce from Emma. Just thinking her name felt like swallowing ashes. She had been his sweetheart from college, the woman who would mend his socks back when he could not afford to buy new ones, the one who would stay awake all night to proofread his very first business proposals. But as the numbers in Brian's bank account grew, Emma stayed the same simple person. She preferred quiet evenings at home. She chose comfortable shoes over stylish ones. She lacked the skill to charm wealthy investors or take command of a boardroom. Brian had told himself that he had simply outgrown her. He needed a status symbol on his arm, not a life partner. So, he ended it with brutal efficiency. He could recall the day with perfect clarity. He had given her the divorce papers along with a check, telling her she no longer fit into his future. She did not yell. She did not break anything. She just stared at him, her eyes filled with a deep and devastating sadness, and whispered, "You will learn the price of this, Brian," before walking out the door into the pouring rain. "Brian, you are totally zoning out," Chloe whined, tapping her dinner fork against her glass. "I ordered the lobster, but our waiter is completely ignoring me." "He is not ignoring you. He is just busy," Brian snapped, his patience wearing thin. All of a sudden, the background noise of the restaurant, the quiet jazz music, the low hum of conversations, the clatter of silverware faded away. It was not a slow fade to silence. It was a sudden, collective gasp. Brian frowned. Lorne hosted celebrities all the time. A hush like this signaled the arrival of someone with true power. "Who is that, Chloe?" Chloe asked, stretching her neck to see. "Is that some kind of movie star?" Brian turned in his chair, just enough to see the grand entrance. The host, a man named Pierre, who normally acted superior to everyone, was now nearly bowing. Two people entered, escorted by four security guards, who moved with the quiet efficiency of highly trained soldiers. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet 2 inches, and wore a custom-made charcoal suit that likely cost more than Brian's first car. He had hair that was a mix of silver and black, and a jawline that looked as if it were carved from granite. Brian froze in place. He knew who that man was. Everyone in the world of high finance knew him. That was Adrian Vance, the chief executive officer of Vance Global, the man who controlled the shipping companies Brian relied on, the communication satellites Brian leased, and the banks from which Brian borrowed money. Adrian Vance came from old, powerful money. He was a predator so formidable that even other predators stayed out of his way. But it was not Adrian who caused the blood to rush from Brian's face. It was the woman who was holding his arm. She was dressed in a long, flowing gown of emerald green silk that hugged her figure before pooling at her feet. Her hair, which she used to keep in a simple, messy bun, now fell in shiny, perfect waves. All the way down her back, around her neck, was a sapphire necklace that captured the light, sparkling like a brilliant blue flame. It was Emma, but not the Emma he remembered. The quiet, timid woman was gone. This woman carried herself with her head held high, her eyes scanning the room with a calm and almost frightening confidence. And then Brian noticed it. The silk dress had been expertly tailored to fit the very obvious, round curve of her belly. She was very pregnant. Brian's hand tightened around his wineglass with such force that the stem snapped. Red wine spilled across the spotless white tablecloth, looking disturbingly like a pool of blood. "Oh my God, Brian! Look at the mess you made!" Chloe cried out, leaping back to keep the wine from splashing on her. Brian did not hear her. He could only hear a loud roaring sound in his ears. Pregnant? She appeared to be at least 7 months along. He quickly did the calculation. 6 months had passed since the divorce. She was 7 months pregnant. The room started to feel like it was spinning. Was the baby his, or had she really moved on that fast? As the host escorted Adrian and Emma across the restaurant, their path took them right past Brian's table. Brian felt completely frozen, unable to even look away. He expected Emma to look down, to try to hide, to make herself smaller. Instead, as they got closer, Emma's eyes met his directly. There was no trace of fear in her gaze. There was no love there, either. There was just a cold, smooth indifference, the same way you might look at a total stranger on a train. Adrian Vance gently placed a protective hand on the small of Emma's back and leaned down to whisper something close to her ear. Emma laughed, a bright musical sound that Brian had not heard from her in years. They swept past his table, leaving behind a faint scent of jasmine and expensive cologne. "Wait a minute," Chloe whispered, her eyes narrowing. "Is that not your ex-wife, the one who was kind of plain?" Brian stared at the red stain that was spreading over the white tablecloth. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "That is Emma." A waiter hurried over to clean up the spill, apologizing over and over, as if Brian's loss of control was his fault. Brian irritably waved him off, his hunger now completely gone. "I do not understand," Chloe said, picking at a piece of bread. "You told me she was broke. You said she was a nobody. So why is she with him? That is Adrian Vance. My dad says Adrian Vance has enough money to buy this entire city if he felt like it." I do not know, Chloe, Brian snapped, loudly enough for a nearby couple to glance in their direction. He lowered his voice, his hands clenched into fists beneath the table. I do not know. On the other side of the room, Adrian and Emma had been seated at the private alcove table, the one that even Brian could never manage to reserve. It had a sweeping view of the city skyline, while offering enough privacy to be discreet. Brian watched them with an intense focus. He watched Adrian pull out Emma's chair for her. He saw how the waitstaff swarmed around them, treating Emma as if she were royalty. But the thing that bothered him the most was the way Adrian was looking at her. It was not the look a man gives his beautiful trophy. It was a look of complete and utter adoration, especially in the way his hand came to rest on her stomach after he sat down. That single gesture seemed possessive, protective, and fatherly all at once. Is it his child? Brian's thoughts were racing. That is impossible. We were still together 7 months ago. It must be mine. But she never said a word to me. A sudden feeling of ownership flooded his senses. If that was his heir, then he had a right to be told. He was Brian Thorne. People did not keep secrets from him. I am going to the men's room, Brian said as he stood up suddenly. Do not be long, Chloe pouted. I want to order dessert. Brian paid her no attention and started walking across the dining room. He was not heading to the restroom. He was walking directly toward the private alcove. His heart was pounding hard against his ribs, a mix of pure anger and a strange, sudden desperation he was not prepared to feel. As he got closer, 2 very large men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows, blocking his way. Step aside, Brian demanded, trying to use his authoritative CEO voice. I am an acquaintance of theirs. Mr. Vance is not receiving any visitors, one of the guards said, his voice flat and uninterested. Let him through, Marcus, a deep voice called out from the table. The guards moved apart. Brian stepped into the alcove. Emma did not even lift her eyes from the menu. She looked absolutely radiant, her skin glowing from the hormones of pregnancy, her cheeks slightly flushed. She appeared healthier and more beautiful than she ever had during their entire marriage. Emma, Brian said, his voice strained. She slowly put down the menu. Her hazel eyes met his, looking cool and distant. Hello, Brian. I was wondering how long it would take for you to come charging over here. You are pregnant, he said, bluntly. As observant as you have always been, she responded with a dry tone. Is it? Brian glanced over at Adrian, who was watching him with a mocking, predatory smile. While sipping his scotch, Brian looked back at Emma's belly. Is it mine? Emma let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Yours, Brian? You gave up any right to ask that question on the night you threw me out of our home at 11 o'clock at night because you said I lacked vision. If that is my child, I have rights, Brian hissed, taking a step forward. I have lawyers who can... Sit down, boy, Adrian Vance said. He did not raise his voice. He did not get up from his chair. He just spoke, but the absolute command in his tone was enough to make Brian freeze in his tracks. Mr. Thorne, Adrian went on, swirling the ice in his glass. It seems you are operating under a few wrong assumptions. Allow me to correct them for you. First, you will not raise your voice at my fiancé. It upsets the baby. Fiancé? The word struck Brian like a physical punch. Second, Adrian said, his eyes turning to steel. As for the baby's father, you were too busy with your little Instagram model to even notice your wife. During the final year of your marriage, you barely laid a hand on her. We both know how things went down, Brian, so don't play the part of the devoted husband now. Brian's face turned a deep shade of crimson. He stared at Emma, desperate to find a weakness in her composure. Emma, you have to tell him. Tell him what I mean to you. I already told him what you were, Brian, Emma responded gently. She rested a hand on her pregnant belly. I explained that you were the kind of man who had to make me feel insignificant just so you could feel important. I told him how you called me worthless. She then reached over and held Adrian's hand. And then Adrian came along and showed me I was priceless. It is about the money, isn't it? Brian snapped, his pride shattering. That is all this is. You left a millionaire for a billionaire. You are nothing but a gold digger, Emma. The temperature in the private dining area seemed to plummet. Adrian placed his glass on the table. The soft click sounded as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence. Be very careful, Adrian said in a low voice. You are talking to the chairwoman of the Vance Foundation, and she is nothing like you, Brian. She did not inherit her fortune or cheat to get it. She rebuilt her life from the ashes you left her in. Just then, Chloe, who had lost her patience, came clicking over to their table in her towering heels. She looked back and forth between the three of them, aware of the tension, but not smart enough to understand it. Honey, what is taking so long? Chloe complained, clinging to Brian's arm. Her eyes landed on Emma, and she smirked. Oh, it is you. Wow, you have really let yourself go. I guess the divorce hit you hard. An absolute silence fell over the table. But Emma did not get upset. Instead, she offered a slow, pitying smile. And you must be Chloe. Brian always did have a thing for shiny objects with no real value. Chloe let out a gasp. Excuse me? You are welcome to him, Emma said, turning her attention back to the menu. He is already something I threw away. But let me give you some free advice, honey. You should read the prenuptial agreement very carefully. Brian watches over his money like a hawk. Adrian let out a dark laugh. Marcus, get them out of my sight. They are spoiling my dinner. The security guard moved forward, his large frame blocking their path. This is not finished, Emma, Brian growled as the guards led him away. You cannot keep my child from me. I will see you in court, and I will ruin you. Adrian Vance rose to his feet. He was much taller than Brian. He leaned in, his voice a threatening rumble next to Brian's ear. If you dare to sue her, or bother her in any way, or even so much as look at her again, I will do more than sue you, Brian. I will purchase your entire company, sell it off piece by piece, and leave you with nothing but the cheap suit you are wearing. Do not ever challenge me. Brian backed away. He had no other option. He returned to his own table, while Chloe whined in his ear about how disrespectful they had been. But Brian was not listening. He sat down and stared at the empty seat where his entire future was supposed to be. He watched Emma, who was laughing with a billionaire and carrying a child that could inherit 2 fortunes. And in that moment, for the very first time, Brian Thorne felt utterly powerless. But the evening was not over yet. As Brian tried to get the waiter's attention for the bill, eager to leave, he noticed a man in a gray suit walking toward Adrian's table. It was someone serving legal papers. Brian waited. Was Adrian in some kind of trouble? But no. The man walked right past Adrian and came directly to Brian's table. Are you Brian Thorne? The man inquired. Yes, you have been served, the man stated, placing a heavy envelope on the table right beside a wine stain. Brian ripped it open with trembling hands. The lawsuit was not from Adrian, it was from Emma. The plaintiff was listed as Emma Vance Cross. The subject was the theft of intellectual property related to the Thorne algorithmic model. All the blood drained from Brian's face. The algorithm, the very code that had earned him his first $1 billion. The code he had always said he wrote, but was actually written by Emma in their college dorm room 10 years earlier. She had not just come back for revenge. She had come back to take it all. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Brian Thorne's office, but offered no comfort. The room was ice cold, the air conditioning cranked up to a chill that mirrored the feeling around the large mahogany table. Brian sat there, with his head in his hands. Across from him sat Marcus Sterling, his top lawyer, a man who typically charged $500 an hour to act unimpressed, but now looked genuinely panicked. "Tell me you are kidding, Sterling," Brian said, pushing the legal documents across the polished surface. She was studying literature. She used to check my emails for typos. She did not write that code. Sterling took off his glasses, his forehead shiny with sweat. "Brian, our forensic tech team analyzed the source code for the Thorne algorithmic model, the one your entire business is built on. They discovered something hidden deep inside the kernel, some concealed metadata." "And?" Brian demanded impatiently. Sterling pressed a button on his laptop, and an image appeared on the wall screen. It showed a long, complicated piece of code, but tucked inside were notes, left by the programmer for Brian. "So you can finally get some sleep tonight. Love, E." Brian just stared at the screen. The memory came rushing back and felt like a punch to the gut. It was from 7 years ago. He was about to fail his final exams because his program kept crashing. He had fallen asleep from pure exhaustion on their cheap sofa. When he finally woke up, the code was working perfectly. Emma was sitting nearby with a cup of coffee and a tired smile. She just said she had messed with it a little. He thought she had just corrected a spelling error. He never imagined that she had completely rebuilt the entire thing from the ground up. "It is even worse than that," Sterling said, his voice low. "The legal papers state that she registered the copyright for this exact code under the name Ghostwriter 3 days before your company launched. She is the legal owner of the intellectual property, Brian, and she is requesting an immediate court order to shut down your servers while you negotiate a deal." "Shut us down," Brian shouted, standing up so fast his chair fell over. "If our servers are offline for even an hour, our stock will fall by 10%. If they are shut down for good, Thorntech will be completely broke in less than a week. In that case, you have to make a deal," Sterling said, with a serious expression. "Offer her anything she wants. Cash, company shares, a public apology. Because if you fight this in court, she has the digital proof and she has Adrian Vance's lawyers supporting her. They will destroy us." Brian walked over to the window and stared out at the city he believed he ruled. His phone vibrated. It was a text from Chloe. "Babe, my credit card was just declined at Gucci. You need to handle this right away. Everyone is looking at me." Brian hurled the phone at the wall, and it shattered into pieces. He could not let his company fail. He was Brian Thorne. He was a visionary. He was not some fake who had built his career on his wife's talent. "Where is she now?" Brian asked, turning to face Sterling. "She is the host of the Silver Gala at the Metropolitan Museum tonight," Sterling answered. "It is a charity event for single mothers. A single ticket costs $20,000. "Get me a ticket," Brian demanded. "Brian, if you go near her, you will be violating the restraining order." I said, "Get me a ticket," Brian yelled. "I am not going to cause a scene. I am just going to remind her that she used to love me. Emma is a compassionate person. She is sentimental. If I can just speak with her alone, without Vance around, I can convince her to stop this. I can get her to drop the lawsuit." Sterling looked unconvinced, but took out his phone. "I will see what I can do. But Brian, she does not seem very compassionate anymore." The Metropolitan Museum had been turned into a dazzling spectacle of silver and white. The most powerful people in the city, from politicians to wealthy heirs and tech founders, moved through the grand halls with glasses of champagne. Brian came by himself. He had left Chloe at home. He wanted to appear somber and regretful. He had on his most formal suit, yet he felt like a fraud in his own life. It seemed like every quiet conversation he passed was about him. Did you see that Thorntech stock took a nosedive today? I heard Vance Global is making a huge investment in one of their main rivals. Brian moved through the packed room, searching for a dress the color of emeralds. But he did not see green that night. He saw silver. Emma was standing on a platform near the Temple of Dender, addressing the crowd with a microphone. She was wearing a silver maternity dress that flowed around her like liquid starlight. She looked majestic and completely out of reach, like a queen speaking to her people. And that is why the Vance Foundation is donating $50 million to provide legal assistance for women who have been unfairly treated in their divorce cases, Emma announced, her voice confident and unwavering. The room was filled with the sound of applause. Brian felt a wave of sickness wash over him. That charity fund was a clear attack on him. As Emma came down from the stage, immediately mobbed by well-wishers, Brian saw his chance. He worked his way through the groups of people, ignoring the cold stares from those he had slighted in the past. "Emma!" he shouted, just as her security team was about to lead her away. She paused. The people around them stepped back, creating a circle, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. It was the public confrontation everyone had been whispering about. Emma turned around very slowly. For once, Adrian was not with her. He was on the other side of the room, talking to a senator. This was Brian's opportunity. "Brian," she said, her face impossible to read, "you actually bought a ticket. How thoughtful of you. I will just consider the $20,000 as a down payment on the alimony you still owe me." The mention of the word alimony caused a few people nearby to laugh. Brian moved in closer, his voice dropping to an urgent, low tone. "Emma, please, I need to speak with you somewhere private." "I have nothing to tell you that cannot be said in a courtroom," she answered without warmth. "This is about the company," Brian begged. "You are going to ruin it. Do you realize how many people are going to be out of a job? I understand that you are mad at me, but do not punish my employees for it. That is not the person you are. You are a good person. You are the kind of woman who rescues stray cats." Emma's eyes burned with anger. The woman who rescued stray cats ceased to exist the night she had to sleep in her car because her husband had all her credit cards canceled. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The color drained from Brian's face. That was a secret he had prayed would stay buried. "I did not realize you had nowhere to stay," he managed to say. "I figured you were with your parents." "My parents passed away, Brian. You knew that perfectly well. It just did not matter to you." She stepped right up to him, and her voice fell to a menacing hush. "As for the company you call yours, it is not. My code is the foundation of everything. My mind and my endless nights of work built it. You were just the pretty face, Brian. And now I am ripping that mask away." "Emma, hold on," Brian pleaded, grabbing for her hand. "What about our child? If you ruin me, you ruin his future. That baby is mine, correct? You know, in your heart, that he needs me as his father." Emma glanced at his hand resting on her arm, then her eyes met his again. She made no move to free herself. A smile formed on her lips, but it was cold and empty. "You really want to discuss the baby, Brian?" "Yes," he gasped, believing he had found a way through to her. "It is my right to know." "All right," she declared, speaking loud enough for the surrounding guests to turn their heads. "On the evening you threw me out, I was holding a small gift. Do you recall that?" Brian's brow furrowed as he searched his memory. He did remember. She was clutching a little white box. He had swatted it from her grasp, desperate to push her out before Chloe arrived. "I recall," he whispered. "That box," Emma continued, her voice shaking with rage she fought to control, contained a pregnancy test showing a positive result, and a tiny pair of baby shoes. I was trying to give you the news. I wanted to tell you that we were starting a family, but you just stared at me and ordered me to take my garbage and leave." The world seemed to tilt as all the color vanished from Brian's face. "So do not stand there acting like you care about being a father," Emma seethed. "You turned your back on your own child before you even knew he existed. But he has a father now, a true man who comforted me when I was in tears, who was there for every doctor's appointment, and who constructed the baby's room himself." "That is different," Brian protested, but his voice had no strength. "Biology is important. Biology only makes you the source, Brian. It is love that makes a man a father." All at once, a firm hand came down on Brian's shoulder. It was Adrian Vance, who had moved across the floor with surprising speed. "Is everything all right over here?" Adrian inquired, his tone quiet but carrying a frightening depth. "We are just having a conversation," Brian answered, attempting to dislodge the hand. It would not budge. Adrian's hold was like a steel clamp. "It appeared to me that you were causing my wife distress," Adrian stated. "She is not your wife at this moment," Brian shot back, his envy boiling over. Adrian simply smiled. He reached into his jacket, produced a folded document, and neatly placed it into Brian's chest pocket. "Review this when you step outside. It is a copy of the adoption agreement. I legally adopted the child 2 weeks ago, while still in the womb, with Emma's full consent. The court approved it, citing proven abandonment by the biological source." Brian could only stare, completely stunned. "You are not allowed to do that. I am Adrian Vance," he said plainly. "There is nothing I cannot do. Now, get out of my sight before I have security throw you down the front steps." Overcome with shame and utterly defeated, Brian fled as he felt the stares of New York's most powerful people on his back. He stumbled into the crisp evening air near Central Park. He pulled the document Adrian gave him from his pocket. It was more than just an adoption agreement. A DNA analysis was attached to the other side. Subject: Brian Thorne. Finding: 0% chance of paternity. Brian stood, perfectly still. He reread the words. 0%. His eyes darted across the page, and that was when he noticed the doctor's note at the very bottom. The subject suffers from a congenital issue that makes him incapable of fathering children. This condition has likely been present since his teenage years. The paper slipped from Brian's fingers and fell to the pavement. He was not the father. He never could have been the father. It was impossible for him to be a father. But if he was unable to have children and Emma was expecting, then who was the real father? Suddenly the truth struck him. The dates. The work trip Emma took by herself 1 year ago to the West Coast. The location of Vance Global Headquarters. She had not just met Adrian 6 months ago. She had a history with him. The New York rain does not cleanse anything. It only makes the filth more slippery. Brian found himself on the pavement in front of an exclusive fertility clinic on the Upper East Side. The massive oak door swung shut behind him with a thud that resonated deep inside him. He had stormed into the clinic demanding an explanation. He threatened a lawsuit for medical negligence and shouted that Adrian's DNA report was a fake. The doctor, an older gentleman who had no time for the dramatic outbursts of the wealthy, was not impressed. He had merely retrieved Brian's medical records from 20 years prior. It was a file from a time when Brian, as a teenager, was in the hospitals with serious complications from his medical condition. "I informed your parents at the time, Mr. Thorne," the doctor stated, pushing his glasses up his nose. "The internal damage was complete. You have always been incapable of having children. We operated under the assumption that you were aware." Brian wandered aimlessly in the downpour, his costly Italian shoes stepping into deep puddles. He had not been aware, or perhaps, on some level, he had chosen to look away from the truth. For 5 long years, he had made Emma carry the blame. Each month, that she was not pregnant, he would let out a heavy sigh. He would give her a look of disappointment and drop a hint about her biological clock. He convinced her that she was the one with the problem. He pushed her to see medical experts, made her take hormones that left her ill, and made her feel ashamed when no pregnancy occurred. All that time, he was the one who was broken. His hands trembled as he waved down a taxi. He had to get home. He had to tell Chloe. Chloe! The thought jolted him. Chloe was with him for one reason. He had offered her everything. He had promised her an empire to inherit. If she discovered he was sterile and that his business was about to fail, she would vanish before the sun came up. He walked into his penthouse, completely drenched from the rain. The apartment was in chaos. Designer shopping bags were scattered all over the floor, from brands like Chanel, Hermes, and Prada. Chloe was lounging on the couch, encircled by empty boxes, yelling into her phone. I do not care that the credit card was rejected. Try it one more time. Are you aware of who I am dating? She glanced up when Brian came in, water pooling around him on the marble. There you are, Brian. You need to fix my credit card. This is so humiliating. Brian stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. She was undeniably beautiful, but it was a shallow, artificial kind of beauty. Her eyes held no affection, only greed. Chloe, he said calmly, it is time for you to pack your things. She let out a sharp, piercing laugh. I am sorry, did you say we were flying to Paris? No, Brian answered, then walked forward and sent a Chanel box flying with a kick. You are getting out of here. Leave now. Chloe rose to her feet, her expression contorting into an ugly scowl. You cannot be serious. Do you believe you can just throw me away the same way you did your ex-wife? My ex-wife, Brian choked out, the words painful to say, was worth 10 times what you are. She helped create me. You only take from me. Leave, Chloe. I am finished paying for your lifestyle. Fine, she screamed, sweeping a pile of jewelry off a nearby table. You're no fun anyway. And just so you know, Brian, everybody makes fun of you. You act like you are royalty, but you are nothing more than a bank account on legs. And I have heard about the legal trouble. You're about to be a poor man, Brian, and poverty is not a good look for you. She left, slamming the door with enough force to make the walls vibrate. Brian was by himself. He poured a strong drink and stared out at the twinkling city skyline. He had wrecked his marriage for a woman who felt nothing for him. He had pushed away the one person who ever had genuine faith in him. But then, the grief began to morph into something much worse. A cold, vicious rage started to build inside him. Emma knew. She had to have known. If she was pregnant and the baby was not his because he was sterile, it could only mean one thing: she had been unfaithful. The timeline kept bothering him. They were divorced for 6 months, but she was 7 months pregnant. She had been with another man while they were still married. Brian let out a dark, unhinged laugh. The perfect Saint Emma. The woman who acted so flawless. She was a cheater. He picked up his phone. He dialed a contact he had not called in years. A sleazy reporter for a gossip magazine named Barry, who was in his debt. Barry? Brian began, his tone controlled and menacing. I have a big story for you. The truth about the romance between Adrian Vance and Emma Cross. I will tell you how a billionaire poached another man's wife, and how Saint Emma was pregnant with another man's child while still sharing a bed with her husband. That is explosive, Brian, Barry replied, his excitement obvious. But do you have proof of the timeline? The baby is all the proof you need, Brian lied. Publish it. Destroy her public image. If she sues me for my company, I will make certain she is too humiliated to even step into the courtroom. Brian put the phone down. He felt a dark, satisfying sense of accomplishment. If he was going to lose everything, he would drag them all down with him. The headline the following day was savage. Billionaire baby scandal. Did Adrian Vance steal his pregnant lover from her devastated husband? The story portrayed Brian as the sympathetic figure. It described a dedicated husband who was betrayed by a disloyal wife, one who had seduced a wealthier man to elevate her social status. It hinted strongly that the baby was the result of a secret affair that took place under Brian's own roof. Brian remained in his office, observing the explosion on social media. Public sentiment was turning in his favor. People were labeling Emma a greedy opportunist. They were starting to doubt Adrian's character. This will lead to a settlement, Brian declared to Marcus Sterling, whose face was pale with worry. They will withdraw the lawsuit just to stop the negative publicity. Brian, Sterling said, his eyes fixed on his tablet. You have to look at this. Vance Global has just announced a press conference. They are broadcasting it live. Brian swiveled his chair to face the massive screen mounted on his office wall. Adrian Vance was standing there, behind a podium. He did not seem rattled. He did not seem angry at all. He looked like a man about to carry out a sentence. Emma was right beside him. She was not trying to hide. She stared directly at the camera with a look of pure determination. Earlier today, Adrian started, his deep voice filling the room. A very desperate man attempted to use the press to bully a pregnant woman. That man is Brian Thorne. He accused me of infidelity. He told everyone I destroyed a happy home. Adrian paused and stared straight into the camera. We expected this because liars always believe that everyone else lies too. Adrian moved aside, and Emma stepped up to the microphone. I never cheated on Brian Thorne, she said, her voice firm. For 7 years, I was a faithful wife. I supported him when we had absolutely nothing. I was the one writing the code that made him a billionaire while he was sleeping. She held up a piece of paper. This is a medical document. It is from the Mayo Clinic, dated 8 months ago, which was 1 month before Brian divorced me. It proves that I had a single round of IVF treatment using a donor. Brian froze. IVF? I did that? Emma went on, her voice trembling just a little. Because my husband was desperate for a child, but he refused to go see a doctor himself. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to give him the family that he always claimed to want. I paid for the whole thing with my own savings. I went through all the injections completely alone. A deep silence filled the room in the video, and it filled Brian's office too. I found out the treatment had been successful on the very same day that Brian served me with divorce papers, Emma said, as a single tear finally rolled down her cheek. I tried to tell him. He refused to listen. He threw me out of our home. I was pregnant, I had nowhere to live, and I was all by myself. That is when Adrian Vance found me. He did not steal me from you, Brian. You threw me away. He simply picked up the treasure that you were too blind to see. Adrian returned to the microphone. As for the company, Mr. Thorne seems to have forgotten one little thing about the ghostwriter software that he stole. Brian's stomach dropped into his shoes. Emma did not just write the program, Adrian said with a cold smile. She also protected it. There is a fail-safe hidden deep in the system's core, a kill switch. It was designed to activate if the unauthorized user, Brian, tried to alter the main files, which our records show his IT department did this very morning to try and hide the proof of his theft. Adrian glanced at his watch. The kill switch activates in 3, 2, 1. In Brian's office, the lights began to flicker. Then, the low hum of the servers throughout the building went silent. Brian's computer monitor went completely black. "Sir," his assistant screamed as she burst into the room. "The platform is gone. The app is gone. Everything is completely offline. The code, it is just gone. It is deleting itself from the servers." Brian furiously slammed his hands on his keyboard. There was nothing, just a black screen with blinking green letters in the corner. Error. User unauthorized. Goodbye, Brian. On the television screen, Adrian Vance leaned toward the microphone. Thorntech is now nothing more than an empty shell with zero assets. Its stock is in a complete freefall. I have also already been in touch with the SEC to provide them with evidence of Brian Thorne's embezzlement of company money to pay for his mistress's expensive lifestyle. Adrian's eyes were as cold as ice. Checkmate, Brian. The broadcast ended. Brian just sat in the total silence of his dead office. His phone started to ring. It was the board of directors, then the SEC, and then the bank. He did not pick up. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and gazed down at the streets of Manhattan. He had always wanted to be a king. He had always wanted to be feared. He had finally gotten his wish. He was now feared, but as a cautionary tale. He saw a black SUV pull up to the curb far down below. He watched a small figure in a green coat get into the car, helped by a tall man. Even from that far away, he could see the tenderness in the man's gesture. Emma, she had won. She had not just beaten him, she had completely erased him. Brian collapsed to the floor. The silence of the vacant office pressed down on him like a physical force. He reached into his pocket and took out the old, crumpled photo that he had carried in his wallet for years. It was a picture of him and Emma in their college dorm, eating pizza on the floor, laughing. They had been broke, but he had looked happy. He realized in that moment, under the crushing weight of his absolute ruin, that was the richest he had ever been, and he had traded it all away for a diamond chandelier that was never even his. In the world of high-stakes business, 3 years is a very long time. In 3 years, new companies rise, empires collapse, and names that once dominated the news are forgotten. But for Brian Thorne, 3 years felt like 300. The collapse had not been fast. It had not been the quick, clean end he might have hoped for when his office went dark. It was a slow, agonizing dismantle of his life. The SEC investigation lasted for 18 months, a public humiliation that stripped him of every last shred of dignity he had. They took the penthouse apartment first, then came the cars, and then the art collection. He remembered the day the federal marshals arrived to confiscate his collection of watches. He just stood and watched as a man in a cheap windbreaker handled his Patek Philippe, the one he bought when he made his first $10 million, and tossed it into an evidence bag, like it was a toy from a vending machine. That was the exact moment Chloe left him. She did not even pack a single bag. She simply ordered an Uber, looked at him with eyes that held no love, and said, "You are bad for my brand, Brian." Now, 3 years later, Brian stood shivering on a sidewalk in Chicago. The wind blowing off the lake was like a physical blow, a biting, wet cold that soaked right through the thin fabric of his polyester uniform. He was not Brian Thorne, the tech mogul, anymore. He was Jules, the lowest-level valet at the Grand Plaza Hotel. "Hey, Jules, wake up." The shout came from Manny, the 20-year-old valet captain who spent most of his time vaping and scrolling through TikTok. Manny had no clue who Brian used to be. To Manny, Brian was just the quiet, gray-haired man who was always too slow on the uptake and had shaky hands with the car keys. "I am awake," Brian muttered, stomping his feet to get some feeling back into his toes. His cheap black shoes were leaking. The street slush had soaked his socks hours before. "Big night tonight," Manny said, blowing a cloud of strawberry-scented vapor into Brian's face. "The Future of Tech Gala. We have got VIPs coming out of our ears. Do not scratch anything, old man." "These cars cost more than your entire life," Brian flinched. The Future of Tech Gala. 5 years ago, He had been the keynote speaker at this very event. He remembered the sound of the applause. He remembered the feeling of the spotlight, hot and blinding, as he spoke about vision and disruption. He remembered Emma sitting there in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, looking up at him with a pride he now knew he had never deserved. She had worn a simple blue dress that night because he had told her the designer gown she wanted was too flashy. Tonight, he was not the main speaker. He was the help. The hotel doors swung open, spilling golden light and the sound of jazz music up to the snowy sidewalk. The smell of expensive perfume and roasted meat wafted out. A cruel reminder of the hunger that was gnawing at Brian's stomach. He had skipped lunch just to save $5 for the electric bill. The guests began to come outside. Brian recognized some of the faces. There was Marcus Sterling, his old lawyer, laughing with a new client. Sterling looked right past Brian as he handed over a ticket stub for a Mercedes. Brian took the ticket with his head bowed low, the brim of his cap pulled down to hide his eyes. He fetched the car, accepted a $2 tip without saying a word, and watched Sterling drive off. It was a special kind of hell, being invisible in a world where you used to be a god. "Heads up," Manny hissed, straightening his jacket. "We have a whale coming in. Private driver. Blacked out Escalade. That is the Vance detail." "Vance?" The name hit Brian like a taser. His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to run. He wanted to fake a heart attack, hide in the break room, or just disappear into the concrete. Anything but being here right now. But he could not move. His feet were frozen to the pavement, held there by a mix of terror and a sick, twisted curiosity. The massive black SUV pulled up to the curb. It was flanked by 2 security vehicles. It did not look like a car. It looked like a fortress on wheels. The engine hummed with a low, powerful vibration that made Brian's teeth rattle. "Jules, get the door," Manny barked, busy flirting with a socialite in a fur coat. Brian stepped forward. His hands were trembling so badly he had to clasp them behind his back for a moment, just to steady them. He approached the rear passenger door. He saw his own reflection in the tinted glass, a gaunt, hollow-cheeked man. He had gray stubble and eyes that looked haunted. He looked 20 years older than his actual 35. He reached out and pulled the heavy handle. The door swung open, and warmth spilled out. It smelled of leather, cedar wood, and jasmine. The first thing he saw was a shoe, a polished, handmade Italian Oxford. Adrian Vance stepped out. Time had been very kind to Adrian. If anything, the years had only added to his powerful presence. He was broader now, his salt and pepper hair cut in a sharp military style. He moved with the easy grace of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. He did not look at the valet. He turned back to the car, extending a hand. "Careful, love. It is icy." A hand took his. It was a hand Brian knew better than his own. He knew the shape of the fingers, the curve of the wrist. He knew how that hand felt when it smoothed his hair back when he was sick. He knew how it felt when it scrubbed dishes in their first tiny apartment. Emma stepped out. Brian felt the air get knocked out of his lungs. She was magnificent. The mouse was gone. The woman standing before him was a queen. She wore a floor-length gown, a deep crimson velvet that hugged her figure, topped with a white coat that looked like soft snow. Her hair was styled in loose, glamorous waves, and diamonds sparkled at her throat. Not the gaudy, flashy kind Chloe used to demand, but elegant, timeless stones. But it was not the clothes that took his breath away. It was her face. The lines of worry that had defined her during their marriage were gone, replaced by a deep serenity. Gave her a radiant look. She appeared serene, cherished. "Wait for me!" A little voice piped up from the car's interior. Brian froze. A small boy, who couldn't have been more than 3, clambered toward the edge of the seat. He was wrapped warmly in a tiny navy peacoat and a bright red scarf. His hair was dark and curly, and his curious eyes took in the world with pure wonder. Adrienne let out a deep, booming laugh, a sound Brian had never once heard, aimed in his direction. "We did not forget you, Leo. Come on over, champ." Adrienne easily scooped the boy into his arms and settled him on his hip. The boy let out a happy laugh, wrapping his little arms tightly around Adrienne's neck. "Did you see the robot, Daddy?" the boy asked with excitement. "The one that had lasers?" "I sure did," Adrienne answered, placing a kiss on the top of the boy's head. "But I have a feeling you enjoyed the dessert table more." "I like cookies," Leo announced with great seriousness. Emma chuckled, gently brushing up a snowflake from the boy's nose. "You are 100% your father's son. A love for sweets and a fascination with lasers. Your father's son." Those words echoed in Brian's mind, ricocheting through the hollow space where his pride used to be. Your father's son. Leo was not Brian's. He could never be. The DNA test had been the final, devastating blow to his ego. He was unable to have children. A genetic dead end. All his speeches about legacy, about creating a dynasty, about the Thorn name. It had all been a complete lie. The true legacy was standing directly in front of him. A joyful, healthy child being raised by a man who never had to demand respect to get it. Brian stood by the open car door, unable to move. He knew he was supposed to close it. He knew he should retreat, disappearing back into the shadows. But he was unable to tear his eyes away from the boy. Leo had his mother's nose. He had his mother's smile. Suddenly, the boy noticed him. Leo's eyes met Brian's. The child did not see a failure. He did not see a bankrupt liar. He simply saw a man wearing a funny hat who was standing in the snow. "Hi," Leo said, waving a hand covered in a mitten. The simple sound of the boy's voice cracked the fragile shell around Brian's heart. Tears stung his eyes, hot and unexpected. He wanted to speak, to say hello back, but his throat felt like it had closed completely. Emma turned her head. She followed the line of her son's gaze. Her eyes fell upon the valet. For a single moment, nothing changed. The snow continued its silent descent around them. The sounds of the city seemed to disappear. Then, the recognition set in. It was not a dramatic moment. She did not gasp. She did not raise a hand to her mouth in shock. Her eyes just widened a tiny bit. She took in the cheap uniform, the soaked shoes, the graying hair, and the name tag that said Jules. Brian steeled himself. He fully expected her to sneer. He fully expected her to laugh. He fully expected her to nudge Adrienne's shoulder and say, "Look, honey, look at that piece of trash." A part of him almost wished she would. He had earned her anger. Anger would have suggested that he still had some importance, even if it was negative. But Emma did not become angry. Instead, her expression softened. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. She looked at him with a deep, soul-crushing sadness. It was the exact look you give a stray animal that has been hurt too many times to trust anyone. It was pity, pure, detached pity. She did not speak his name. She did not give any sign of their shared past. She did not bother to ask how he was doing. She simply turned her attention back to her husband and her child. "It is freezing out here, Adrienne," she said quietly. "Let us get Leo inside the jet. He is starting to shiver." "Absolutely," Adrienne replied. He then turned to Brian. Adrienne had no idea who he was. To Adrienne Vance, Royer-Dien, Brian Thorne was just a forgotten detail, a minor character from the first chapter of his life with Emma. He was so unimportant that he did not even spark a hint of recognition. "Great service," Adrienne said, his tone businesslike, yet kind. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a bill. He tucked it firmly into Brian's hand. "Stay warm," Adrienne said. Brian glanced down. It was a brand new, crisp $100 bill. The face of Benjamin Franklin seemed to stare back, mocking him. "Thank you, sir," Brian whispered. His voice was a shattered, raspy sound he barely recognized as his own. Adrienne gave a nod and turned to leave, leading his family toward the hotel's private entrance, where a car waited to take them to the airport. "Bye-bye," Leo chirped from over Adrienne's shoulder, waving his mittened hand once more. Brian managed to lift a trembling hand and give a small, weak wave in return. "Bye," he mouthed silently. He watched them go. He saw Adrienne lean over and say something softly to Emma. He then saw Emma rest her head on Adrienne's shoulder. They moved together like a single entity, a solid, perfect sphere of love and warmth. They were a family, and Brian was simply the person who held the door open for them. When the heavy glass doors of the hotel swung shut behind them, sealing them away from his sight, the quiet of the street came rushing back. The wind howled as it whipped around the building's corner. Brian stared at the $100 bill in his hand. In his former life, he might have used this to light a cigar. He would have given a waitress a tip this large just for pouring him a glass of water. He would have scoffed at how little it was. Now, this single piece of paper represented the choice between having a meal and going hungry. It was the choice between having heat and freezing in the cold. He clutched the bill so tightly that his knuckles went white. A sob started to build deep in his chest, a sharp, painful thing that he could not hold back. He slumped back against the hotel's cold stone wall, sliding down until he was crouched on the wet sidewalk. He had wasted his life, building a fortress of dollar bills, to keep everyone at a distance, believing that was a sign of strength. He had viewed people as assets and liabilities, as entries on a spreadsheet. He had cast aside the only woman who had ever loved him for who he was. And he did it all because he craved an image that would look good on a magazine cover. He had wanted to be a king, but now he understood the reality. Kings are only men wearing costumes. True power is not found in a crown. It is found in the hand that you hold when the cold snow begins to fall. Emma had found a hand to hold. Brian had nothing but his own two hands, buried deep in his pockets. "Hey, Jules!" Manny yelled from the valet booth, totally unaware of the broken man on the pavement. "Quit pocketing your tips. We have a Corolla coming in. Get a move on." Brian scrubbed at his face with the coarse sleeve of his coat. He drew in a long, shaky breath. The frigid air seared his lungs, bringing him back to the present moment. "Coming," he managed to croak. He pushed himself to his feet. He straightened his cheap, oversized jacket. He placed the $100 bill, a handout from his ex-wife's new husband, into his pocket, right next to his bus pass. He walked over to the dented Corolla that was pulling up to the curb. He opened the door, forced a smile to his lips, and lowered his head. "Welcome to the Grand Plaza," Brian whispered. "How may I assist you?" And that, everyone, is the chilly, silent downfall of Brian Thorne. There were no dramatic explosions, no confrontations in a jail cell, just the slow, freezing discovery that he was the man who had designed his own prison. He wasted a lifetime pursuing things of high value, but never grasped what had true worth. He tossed away a diamond because he was chasing glitter, and by the time he saw his mistake, that diamond was already set in someone else's crown. It is a harsh lesson in karma. Sometimes the real punishment is not about what is done to you, but about what you miss out on. Brian did not get the family, the love, or the lasting legacy. He just got a tip. I really want to know what you think in the comments. That look Emma gave him, that expression of pity, do you believe that was more painful than if she had screamed at him? Is being ignored the most effective form of revenge? And if you had been in Emma's shoes, would you have said anything at all? Or did she make the right choice by just walking away? Let us get a good discussion started below. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, please go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the YouTube algorithm show these stories to a wider audience. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you will not miss another drama. Thank you for watching. And always remember to be kind to the people you pass on your way up the ladder, because you might need to look them in the face on your way back down. This content was carefully researched, crafted, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and lasting value to our viewers.